Today we're taking a bittersweet trip down memory lane as we look at a number of UK attractions that are no longer with us. These range from fan favourites to some weird and wacky rides that you won't see elsewhere. And starting off, we've got a few rides from Alton Towers, and to be honest I could do an entire video just on this park alone, but I picked a selection for today. The most obvious one is the Corkscrew, the ride that effectively put Alton Towers on the map. It was a Vekoma looping coaster and to this day still is part of the entrance to the park. The iconic Corkscrew itself sits at the entrance as you are greeted to the park. Now the next one I've got from Alton Towers is, the ride itself isn't anything particularly fancy, right? It was Thunderlooper. It was effectively a shuffle coaster that did a loop. I'd still like to go on it, but I didn't. What's weird about this one though is that this was kind of in the earlier days when the locals weren't quite so vocal, shall we say. Right, tangent. I've never understood this. Why would you live next to a theme park and then complain about the noise? Unless you've lived there before it was a theme park, don't move next to a theme park. Crazy suggestion. The locals obviously do complain about noise and there's height restrictions and all sorts of stuff in Alton Towers. This ride broke all of that before it was a thing, but what's bizarre is the noise of this ride led to the local cows to mate at the wrong time of year. You can actually still ride this. It is over in Brazil nowadays, so if you are interested and you fancy a trip, get yourself over to Brazil and you can ride Catapult. Staying in Alton Towers, we have yet another ride, and that is the Black Hole. And the Black Hole was a Schwarzkopf Jetstar model. It was effectively a standard model. I mean, there's many of these rides that were out there. What was unique about this one was the fact that they just put a giant tent around it to make it a dark ride. It had a few upgrades. I don't think I ever got on the ride, if I'm honest. If I did, I don't remember it because it wasn't anything spectacular. And of course it closed in 2005 and it left to make way for the Smiler. The last one I've got for Alton Towers is a flat ride this time, and that is Ripsaw. Now Ripsaw was very popular amongst fans. It sat in Forbidden Valley near Nemesis, and it was known, it was a great attraction off-ride as well as on-ride because they had the water jets that would get you a little bit damp on that ride. Now there have been some rumblings. That area was used most recently by Funk and Fly. Obviously the Retro Squad have now left and that area is empty. The building beside it is being demolished currently and they are putting in a new retail attraction, and the park have confirmed, I believe they've confirmed that they've purchased some new flat rides. Now I don't think we're going to see them all at once and we don't know what they are and where they are going to be situated, but there have been some rumblings that this ride may make a return. Huss still make a top spin. There is a newer model. If you've ever been to Phantasialand, that is probably the best example of a Huss top spin. But Ripsaw was a well-loved ride, and hopefully, fingers crossed, a version of it may be making a return. Moving over to one of my favourite parks, mainly because I went as a child and living in Scotland, it is my nearest park, that is Blackpool. Blackpool again has a rich heritage of rides that have been and gone over the years. And I could easily do another video on that one alone as well, so if you're interested in that, let me know. But I have picked a selection. The first one is Space Invader. Now there was Space Invader and then it got upgraded and rethemed to Space Invader 2. This ride, again, I don't think I went on this, or if I did, I don't have any strong memories of it. It was an indoor coaster, kind of similar to Black Hole over in Alton Towers. Sadly there was a fatality on that ride. The ride itself left. It now exists in Breen Theme Park as Astrostorm. What's interesting is that the facade for this still exists. Obviously they've taken the sign down, and I do wonder how much of the space is empty in there. I mean, it's currently where you see Pizza Kitchen and there's like a stage for Nickelodeon, but it's a large building, so I suspect most of it is still empty. It'd be interesting to see if they ever do something with that, but that ride has gone. And the next Blackpool ride was kind of controversial, or at least its removal was extremely controversial, and that is the Wild Mouse. Now this was an in-house custom wooden Wild Mouse. It was modified. It initially only had 2 levels and it was modified 2 or 3 years after it opened to put an extra level on top. Now it was properly rough. It was a real well, maybe not a headbanger, but your back felt it when you got off this ride. And they did some work to it just before they removed it. They put a new braking system in, but sadly in 2017 in the closed season, with no warning at all, the ride was fully dismantled. and there was a lot of pushback on this one. Obviously nothing they could do, it's gone by that point, but you know, as enthusiasts, typically when rides are removed, there's a bit of a, we're taking this out, you know, your final day to ride it is X, and you'll usually see a lot of enthusiasts go and take advantage of that. That didn't happen for Blackpool because they didn't tell us, they just took it away. And currently it's just the hub. It's like a entertainment space. I suspect they're kind of setting that whole area up for something new. I've got a video about that up there. But yeah, we lost the wild mouse. Now going all the way back, because Blackpool obviously is a park that has been with us for over 100 years. There are some real classic attractions, and one of them is the Virginia Reel. Now, I never experienced this. It shut when I was 1 year old, so I would never have got on this. It's an interesting ride. Again, it was one of the ones when you entered the park, so roughly where Valhalla Ice Blast is, that kind of neck of the woods. I'm not sure if it was exactly there or if it was more where the sort of toilet block outside is, but it was in that kind of entrance area. You've got to look at health and safety standards back then. I'm pretty sure there was no restraints, you just got in this thing and off it went. But it was side friction, so it span on its way down the track. There's only one of these left, kind of, and it's a miniature version in Great Yarmouth, which I'd like to get on just for the experience, but this particular one, and indeed the rest of the Virginia Reels, are no longer with us. Another one in Blackpool that I do remember and I definitely was on, and I do miss because I'm a massive fan of its replacement, and that is the log flume. Now the log flume, when it opened, was the longest log flume in the world. It was quite an iconic part of the park. It was obviously the entrance initially before the big one, so you could easily see it. The big one was then built around it, and then it was removed to put Infusion in its place, which I'd rather have the log flume. And next I've got an entire park that's no longer with us actually, and that is Camelot. Now, I don't think I ever visited Camelot, but it did have some interesting rides. There was some more kind of thrilling coasters like Knightmare. This was a coaster that initially started its life in Japan and then moved over to Camelot. And even though the park closed many years ago, a lot of the attractions were kind of abandoned. This Knightmare was finally destroyed maybe only 2 years ago, 2021-ish, 2022, finally removed. And it's no longer with us, obviously, as is the rest of the park. If you're enjoying this list, hit that like button. If you're not enjoying this, hit the dislike button. That works just as well. And let me know in the comments below any rides that you missed that are on this list or others that you would love to see come back. Now they did have a very unique ride, right? Now on the face of it, if you see photos of this, you're going to think, okay, I've seen many of these before. And that was Dragonflyer. Now this, as I said, looks like many other rides. In fact, looks exactly like the Dragon ride in Plopsaland, Japan, which is a Mack-powered coaster. This one, however, as far as I'm aware, was one of the only diesel-powered coasters, which would have been a very weird experience. I've heard it described as being in a transit van because of the sounds it made, but they had a diesel-powered coaster. Now, another park that the park itself is with us, but it's taken a completely new direction in terms of its demographic, and that is Drayton Manor. Now, Drayton Manor used to have a reasonably good selection of thrilling rides, and over the years they've been removing that and moving more towards a family market. One of the rides that they removed is G-Force. Now, this was a Manor ride, but it had a very strange kind of lift hill mechanism straight up into an inversion, and actually there was an incident where it got stuck at the top of that upside down for a couple of hours, so I'm sure the people that were on that probably didn't go back on it again. Another fan favourite that was at this park and only recently removed, again there was a lot of kind of uproar when this was announced, that was Apocalypse, their drop tower. Now this was initially, I think it had 4 towers, it was retrofitted to add a 5th. It has a couple of sitting towers, it has standing towers, and I think it also was the only, or the first one that had like a floorless standing tower. However, it was removed earlier last year, 2022, to make way for their new, we now know, their new Intamin coaster, the lift and launch, that will open next year. The final one I've got from Drayton Manor is Shockwave. Now, they announced earlier this year that Shockwave will no longer be with us from next year. Now the track will remain, so technically the ride is with us, but it loses its unique element. That is, of course, that it was the UK's only standing coaster. I wasn't a particular fan of this, it seemed to be very divisive. Some people absolutely loved the ride. For me, now I only rode it in the last couple of years, so, you know, arguably towards the end of its service life, it was very rough. It opened in 1994 alongside the big one, and Nemesis, which of course is now known as the Year of the Coaster in the UK, because we have 3 major installations. So we'll be interested to see next year. They're obviously going to change the name and they're putting sit-down trains on it, but it'll be interesting to see how much of the ride experience actually changes when it reopens. Next up, yet again, we have another fan favourite that is no longer with us. It's a ride that was standing but not operating for many years, leading the speculation of what its future was going to be, but earlier this year, Lightwater Valley announced that the Ultimate is completely gone and it has now been demolished. This was a strange ride. It was manufactured by British Rail of all people, which you wouldn't associate with making coasters, and that did come with some challenges. It's obviously not their forte, although they're used to kind of tracks and trains. It was opened by Frank Bruno. If you see the video of it, even a big tough guy like that was like, yeah, no thank you.
I got up there, I was pretty nervous because it was very rocky. Good ride though, very get the heart beating fast, and I get the adrenaline, lose a few calories.
You've been on rides across in the States. How did it compare?
Mr. Kipling, that was very serious out there, Mr. Kipling, because there was some serious bends and some hills where you had to wait and pose for a little bit, get a suntan or get wet, whatever, and then come down again, Mr. Kipling, and go through some serious bends. So that ride was a ride, you know?
It initially had over-the-shoulder restraints and later lap bars. I didn't get to ride this one, but I believe it was somewhat uncomfortable. It was also the longest coaster in Europe, and I believe now that that has gone, the big one is actually the longest coaster in Europe. I've got a bit of a token entry. You've probably heard me moan many times in other videos. Living in Scotland, we have no theme parks. We kind of did, and most of them have all shut. That's why I always call Blackpool my home park, even though it's 3 hours away. We do kind of have a park, M&Ds. If you've ever been to it, yeah, interesting park. It's effectively a bunch of travelling rides that park there for 6 months, a year, whatever. But they did have a looping coaster, Tornado, and again, this was, from what I've heard, extremely rough. Now the ride itself still exists if you do want to go on it. It now lives in France, it's obviously been refurbished, hopefully smoother than it was. But yeah, that we have no longer got any looping coasters in Scotland. Next up, if we go all the way down south to Thorpe Park, you have a couple of rides in there that are no longer with us. The most notable one would be Logger's Leap. Now this has been demolished this year to make way for Hyperion next year. It was their log flume. It had a rather unique double down element in it. As well as that, it was also famously ridden by the royal family. So there's footage and pictures of Princess Diana on that ride back in the 90s. It was interesting as well, if you watch Jack Stilson's construction videos, there is still a small portion of the trough that still exists. And if we just poke our head through this little gap in the fence, you can see from this angle that we have in fact still got Logger's Leap sat there. And they've obviously kind of, as far as we can tell, finished the demolition and started the, well, they've obviously started the construction. There's a lot of vertical construction of Hyperion. The question is, will they actually take that final piece out? Or will it be a little bit like the log flume in Alton Towers, where if you're in the woods, there is still a couple of remnants left. And staying in Thorpe Park, I have a ride that is standing but not operating. Genuinely don't think it will ever operate again. But again, it was a fairly unique ride. There was only 2 or 3 of these manufactured, and that was the Slammer. Now this basically looked like a giant fly swap, kind of 2 arms that you sat in, and then it lifted up, and then it started rotating. So you were kind of doing full circles that way, and then in reverse. Again, from what I've heard, not the most comfortable, certainly not the most reliable. From what I've seen, it had a lot of downtime, but it is still present in the park. I don't know if all of it's present, they may have removed chunks of it, but the main structure still exists. I don't know if they're going to do anything with that or if it will eventually get removed. So there's a selection of rides that have been removed from the UK. There's obviously many more than that. If you'd like to see a part 2, let me know down below. And I've referenced rough rides many times. If you're interested in seeing a selection of rough rides that do still exist, and I would suggest you don't go on, check that video out there. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.